pros look effortless at any running speed because they follow this blueprint. So the more you can build on these 10 things, the better you'll perform and the faster you will get. Starting with improving your ability to pump and use oxygen during exercise, also known as your VO2 max. Did you know during high intensity exercise, the average runner pumps around 20 litres of blood per minute? But the pros do almost double that, equivalent to filling 160 coffee cups per minute. And while this is partly a genetic advantage passed down from your mother's side of the family, you have more influence over your VO2 max than you probably think.
If you took a person off the street, we could expect with a fairly vigorous training program for them to increase their VO2 max by 20, maybe 25%.
This is Professor John Hawley, who I interviewed on the Run Smarter podcast to discuss his 2 research papers on what separates the pros from us everyday athletes. And when it comes to rigorous workouts to improve your VO2 max, here is what he recommended.
After a 10-minute warm-up, they might do a session 4 times 5 minutes, hard efforts at their best current 10-kilometer pace. It's a very tough session, both physiologically and mentally.
But it's not all about VO2 max. In fact, John mentioned that he's tested athletes who have an enormous VO2 max value, but don't perform as well as he would expect, and vice versa.
Kipchoge did not have the highest VO2 max. What do you have? What they call physiological and mental resilience. He always thought he could run a sub-2, and you have to have that belief.
It has also been reported that he uses visualization and mindfulness techniques. And when he was asked where his strengths come from, he says it lies in the power of the mind. So your first step is to do a challenging workout. Luckily, you now have this VO2 max workout as a perfect example. Next, set a mantra that deeply resonates with you. Kipchoge famously uses the mantra, "No human is limited." But here are some other examples that might work better for you. Once you've found your own, repeat it yourself in the tough moments of the workout. Then, once you've completed the session, acknowledge the discomfort and link part of your success to your resilience, which builds belief and therefore more resilience. What also makes the pros look effortless is their ability to use the least amount of energy at any given speed. In other words, the elites have a superior running economy.
If we look at someone who's running at 16 kilometers an hour, all right, that's 10 miles an hour. If you look at the elite marathon runner, their oxygen cost at that pace is around 45 to 50 milliliters of oxygen. But 40 to 50 milliliters of oxygen might well be a VO2 max value for a non-elite runner.
So what is a simple, practical thing you can do this week to be more economical? Well, if you have a watch that tracks your data, check your average steps per minute, also known as your cadence. For most, the optimal cadence will range between 165 and 185. But there is no one number that is optimal for everyone, so some trial and error is required. If you think you might benefit from a higher cadence, then increase it by 5% with a metronome while running at the same speed and see if it reduces your heart rate or effort level. When it comes to running technique, you may have been told that changing your posture or removing a heel strike or flicking your heels higher will increase running efficiency. But the research fails to make this association. In fact, some of the pros even have an aggressive heel strike. And luckily, John's advice on running technique is a lot simpler.
If you're doing enough miles, you've probably self-optimized. In other words, you're probably running at the most economical for you.
So, experience counts. The more mileage under your belt, the more the body will feel out this movement and self-optimize based on your anatomical characteristics and your preferred movement path. John also gave the example of running with his wife, which is a lot slower than his normal pace, which puts him back in an inexperienced and inefficient running style. So, get the necessary reps in and allow your body to self-optimize at various running speeds, including your race pace. But why can't we as recreational runners just analyze and mimic the running styles of the pros?
If you look at the best marathon runners in the world, well, certainly from East Africa, and they do have different leg proportions. They have a longer femur, which is, if you like, the hip bone. That's much longer compared to their total leg length. The other advantage, and you did touch on it earlier, is what we call stored elastic energy in the tendons. They tend to have very stiff tendons. The tendons then actually rebound a lot more than if they're not.
This domain cannot be ignored because winning the genetic lottery plays a significant role. The athletes will almost always have a genetic advantage, which creates a superior body shape, VO2 max, lung capacity, slow twitch muscle fiber percentage, all geared for running long distances. The same can be said for epigenetics, which is upregulating certain genes based on the athlete's environment and lifestyle. For example, the Rift Valley, which has produced runners such as Eliud Kipchoge, is around 2,500 meters in altitude and has 25% less oxygen compared to sea level. Constantly training in this environment upregulates certain genes responsible for utilizing oxygen, which then supercharges the body when running at sea level. But unlike genetics, you have control over your epigenetics. So what you can do this week is make one small lifestyle change involving either your sleep, nutrition, or fitness routine. For example, drinking an extra glass of water, or substituting a snack for a healthier alternative. Keep making these micro adjustments in a way that is sustainable for you. But I'll admit, this won't have you running faster straight away, but I promise the next 5 areas will give you results immediately, starting with knowledge and education. For the elite athlete, this might mean being surrounded by the right team. But for us recreational runners, we need to take education into our own hands. And the fact that you've clicked on this video means you are the type of runner who rightly sees running knowledge as a worthwhile investment. But to really make yourself accountable requires a little bit more skin in the game. So if you want to raise your running IQ and commit to training smarter starting today, then take the next practical tip, and that is to hit subscribe and comment, "I pledge to run smarter." Not only will you make a commitment to yourself, but taking this action is also a good viewer signal for YouTube, who will respond by surfacing more videos like this into your feed. Plus, once you make this pledge, you will join thousands of Run Smarter scholars who have already made this pledge and are transforming their running as we speak. The next important domain is nutrition, which I consider beneficial in 2 ways. The first is to enhance your performance on race day. For example, in the Pro Runner Spotlight segment on the Run Smarter podcast, every elite athlete shares a strict carb loading strategy to prevent hitting the wall. Following this protocol for up to 48 hours will ensure your muscles have a full tank of glycogen ready for race day. But the second way I like to think about nutrition is giving the body the necessary building blocks to repair and recover from all of your training. People are used to gradually building up their training volume, but it's not compensated with a build-up of adequate nutrition. This can lead to underfueling, which leads to a decreased performance and injuries. And since protein is the nutrient responsible for rebuilding the body, my practical takeaway this week is to measure your protein intake to make sure it is adequate. Here are the general recommendations for protein intake when training for marathons. And there are free apps out there that can easily track your daily protein intake to know if you are getting the adequate amounts for recovery. A top-notch nutrition strategy is what helps the pro runners recover. But an even bigger recovery domain that the pros have mastered is their sleep strategy. In fact, you could pile on every other recovery strategy known to man and it wouldn't match the recovery benefits of a good night's sleep. Which is why it has been shown to enhance athletic performance when sleep is good, and a 70% increase in injury rates when sleep is bad. Aim for 7 to 9 hours of sleep while keeping your sleep and wake times consistent. However, depending on your training volume, the recommendations can go up as high as 10 to 12 hours per night. And if the required hours cannot be achieved, supplementing a 30-minute nap in the early afternoon is a good option. Sleep is a must if you want to perform at your best. And when it comes to running your best marathon, another must is the right shoe selection. In particular, supershoes like the Nike Vaporfly, which has a carbon fiber plate and advanced foam technology to return more energy back to the runner. Here are the best marathon times recorded throughout history, and 15 of the top 20 have come after 2018 once these shoes were introduced. And yes, we are talking about the elites, but everyday runners also benefit from these shoes.
Shoes that I'm talking about, which give a 3 or even 4% reduction in energy costs. Now, 4% is enormous. Don't forget that you can actually have a save in oxygen cost by just running a different pair of shoes.
Before we get into my last tip, I want you to have a good look at this blueprint. Because while it may seem overwhelming, all I want you to do right now is to identify and focus on your weakest link. This will yield the best return before then refocusing on something else. But there was one domain I simply couldn't leave out, And if we could learn anything from the pros to run better races, it is this. You are looking at the speed fluctuations of a typical recreational runner compared to the elites. Essentially, elites have mastered the skill of an even pace strategy, which has been shown to deliver the best finish times. But if you mess up this strategy and don't end up running your perfect race, a certain percentage of your potential that you arrived with was wasted. I actually stole this quote from Matt Fitzgerald, the author of How to Run the Perfect Race, and he breaks down how to calculate your race pace and how to execute the best pace strategy in this next video.